Okay, so something really dramatic is going on in Turkish higher education right now. It's a story of this sudden, almost explosive growth on the global stage, and it tells us a ton about the pressures and promises that universities are facing today. So let's just dive right in.
So, where are we getting all this from? Well, our guide for this whole explainer is this really fascinating new academic paper. It's by Associate Professor Tuna Boytun, and what he did was meticulously break down how Turkish universities have been doing in the QS sustainability rankings over the last few years.
And honestly, the paper kicks off with something that's, well, it's pretty startling. We're talking about a sudden explosion of Turkish universities showing up on a very specific global list.
All right, let's rewind the clock a bit, back to 2023. If you'd looked at the QS sustainability rankings then, you would have found just 11 Turkish universities. I mean, that's a respectable number, sure, but still a pretty small footprint on the global stage.
Okay, now let's jump forward just 3 years. By 2026, that number, it absolutely skyrockets to 53. 53! That's almost a 5-fold increase in, no time at all. It's just wild.
I mean, just look at the scale of this jump right here. We go from 11 in 2023 up to 24 the next year, and then boom, it more than doubles again to 53. This isn't just a slow and steady climb, you know? This is a full-on exponential leap.
So, yeah, that brings us to the big question here, right? What is happening? How does something like this even happen? And maybe more importantly, what does it actually mean? Are these universities suddenly becoming sustainability superstars, or is something else going on?
Okay, to really get this story, we first have to understand how they're even keeping score. It's like, what's the measuring stick here? Because these rankings, they aren't just pulled out of thin air. They're built on a very specific framework.
And at the absolute core of this whole thing is a 3-letter acronym, ESG. You might have heard of it. It's basically a framework to judge an organization on 3 key areas: environmental, social, and governance.
So let's quickly break that down, right? The E is for environmental. Pretty straightforward. Think energy use, waste, green buildings, that kind of stuff. The S is for social. This is all about equality, how the university works with its local community, and, are its graduates actually getting jobs? And then the G is for governance. This one's about the nuts and bolts, the ethics, the transparency, who's making the big decisions, and how.
Okay, so now we get the rules of the game. And this is where we get to the real juicy part, the core finding of the paper. Because once you stop looking at just the number of schools on the list and you start digging into how they're actually scoring on these ESG pillars, well, that's when a totally different and honestly a much more surprising story pops up.
So you gotta ask, right? With this huge flood of new universities in the rankings, are they just crushing it across the board? Is this a story of straight A's?
Yeah, not so much. The paper shows this huge contrast, like a tale of 2 different report cards. On the social side of things, Turkish universities are absolutely knocking it out of the park. Excellent scores, always getting better. But when you look at the environmental and the governance scores, it's a different story. The paper calls it weak, inconsistent, and full of data gaps. And this right here, this is the whole thesis of the paper, really. The author nails it with this quote. There's a clear asymmetry. That's the key phrase. They're super strong on the social stuff, but they're hitting these structural limitations on the other 2 pillars. So, of course, the big question is, why? Why this weird split? What's going on that makes them so good at one thing and, well, not so good at the others? The research actually digs into some pretty deep-seated reasons for this gap. Turns out that high social score is no accident, and it's not something new. The paper basically argues it's baked into the DNA of the Turkish higher ed system. For ages, they've had these traditions of making education accessible to everyone, they've got robust scholarship programs, and their universities have always had this mission to be like engines for their local communities. And on the flip side, the weaknesses are just as structural. For example, the paper points out that the basic infrastructure for just collecting environmental data often isn't there yet. I mean, think about trying to track energy and waste for a whole university. You need serious systems for that. Plus, there are issues with transparency, and just the basic idea of formal ESG reporting is still pretty new in the country.
But here's a really important point. You can't just lump all 53 of these universities together. The research actually found 3 different groups, or clusters. First, you've got your big, well-funded research hubs. Then there's a big chunk of those regional universities that are amazing at the social mission we just talked about. And finally, you have the newcomers, the ones who are really just starting to figure this whole reporting thing out.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. These global rankings, are they actually a good thing? Or do they cause a bunch of problems we don't think about? The paper makes a great point. They're really both. They're an opportunity, but they're also a constraint.
Let's look at the two sides of that coin. On the one side, yeah, these rankings can be a massive opportunity. They can push universities to make real, positive changes, get them more attention on the world stage, and basically speed up reforms. But, and this is a big but, there's the other side. There's a huge risk that schools just start gaming the system, just ticking boxes to look good on paper. These rankings can also make things harder for less wealthy institutions and pull focus away from what really matters on the ground. It's a total double-edged sword.
So with all this complexity, what's the solution? What's the way forward? Well, the cool thing about this paper is that it doesn't just point out the problems, it actually lays out a pretty clear blueprint for what to do next.
For the universities themselves, the advice is super concrete. Step 1. Stop treating this like a side project. You gotta bake these ESG goals right into your main strategy. That means creating a real sustainability office with a real budget. It means making big public commitments, like going net zero. And it means being more transparent by publishing things like your ethical codes and diversity policies for everyone to see. But hey, it's not all on the universities. The paper is clear that this needs to be a team effort, calling for action at the national level. We're talking about better oversight from bodies like the Council of Higher Education, creating one single national standard for reporting so everyone's on the same page, and, importantly, getting some dedicated government money to fund these big green campus projects.
And all of this really leaves us with one big final question, doesn't it? As we see more and more universities all over the world jumping into this rankings race, you have to wonder, are these rankings a real tool for making the world better, or are they just becoming another game for universities to win, another trophy for the shelf? What's happening in Turkey shows us that the answer isn't simple at all. It's complicated, and honestly, the final chapter of this story is still being written.